Hello and welcome to a special midweek episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I do these videos weekly, typically, for a couple different reasons. The first of which is take my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week as I am working with the text and move into the process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation. That's the first reason for doing these, and the second is just to allow you, the viewer, who have come across this video for whatever reason brought you here today, to gain some insight into this particular text. So that's why I do these. Now, as I mentioned, this is a midweek episode as I am preparing for Maundy Thursday. Here we are in the midst of Holy Week. Seems surprising that we're here already, and yet here we are. Maundy Thursday is, of course, the first of the 3 days that lead up to Easter. We have Maundy, Thursday, Good Friday, and then sometimes you'll have what's called the Easter Vigil. Different traditions and different congregations will approach these different celebrations or these different worships differently. different. Here in my congregation, we do celebrate Maundy, Thursday. We do typically a little bit more of a traditional Lutheran old school liturgy than normally we do, including Holy Communion, and of course there'll be a sermon, which is why I'm doing this. Good Friday in my congregation, we don't have a sermon. We just we kind of go through the Passion narrative and read through it while we're gradually stripping the articles off the altar, and the sanctuary gets darker and darker and darker. It's called a service of tenebrae, and it just kind of represents going through the story of Christ's passion and death on the cross along with him. That's what we do there. So there won't be a brain dump for Good Friday because I'm not doing a sermon. We also don't do the Easter Vigil. That's just not something that we do, though I do have colleagues that do it. But so then we'll come in for Easter Sunday will be our next go around this coming Sunday. So here in a couple more days we'll have a video, or I'll have a video for that. So that's kind of what's coming. Now, Maundy Thursday, of course, is one there where we tend to focus in on the Last Supper. Thursday night was when the Last Supper happened. Depending on which gospel you're reading, well, John, which is the one that we're utilizing, is actually shifts things a day forward in comparison with where we're at leading into Passover. But I'll get to that in a minute. But we tend to focus in on that, and that's oftentimes why congregations will have Holy Communion. A lot of times in different congregations, they'll celebrate First Communion for young people on Maundy Thursday. It seems a fitting time because the Last Supper is, of course, where Jesus instituted the Last Supper. John's Gospel, though, again, doesn't feature the institution of communion at the Last Supper, and it's the foot washing, which will be the text that I'll be reading here in a minute. But and because of that, sometimes people or different traditions will focus in on baptism for that, and that's a perfectly acceptable thing too. It's very sacramental either way, but that's just kind of a little tiny bit of background into what's going on there. Maundy comes from a Latin word that I cannot rattle off from memory at the moment, but it means commandment, which is, of course, fitting because, as we'll hear, Jesus leaves us with a new commandment. He leaves his disciples with a new commandment to love one another. But with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So Maundy Thursday, March 29th, 2018, end of March already, holy cow. The assigned gospel comes out of John chapter 13 verses, well, this actually lists the whole thing. The assigned text is 1 through 12a and then 31b through 35. And for whatever reason, what I have listed here actually contains 1 through 17 because it's a little bit of the aftermath as Jesus is talking about what he has done in the foot washing, but that's not the actual assigned text. So I'll stop at 12 and then skip ahead to 30 to 31. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. During supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel that was tied around them. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus answered, You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand. Peter said to him, You will never wash my feet. Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew the one who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and returned to the table, he said to them, and now here's the skip. That's the end, the first part of verse 12, and now we're jumping ahead to 31. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Yeah, that's kind of confusing. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Okay, so that's the reading. Again, it skips over some stuff. As I mentioned, the first portion that gets skipped is Jesus kind of asking them, "Do you understand what I've done for you, or what I've done to you?" And then we have the part. It's the exchange back and forth with Judas before Judas receives the bread that's dipped in the bowl and given to him. Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." It's the one that I dip and I hand it to. And then Jesus tells him, "Go do what you must do." And Judas goes out, and it's night. So that's what's happened in this gap before 31, before Jesus starts in with I've been glorified in God, and God is glorified in me, and all this. Now, some thoughts about the Last Supper. Regardless of if it's the setting of the Passover meal itself, which Matthew, Mark, and Luke have that, or if it's the night before and it's the day of preparation, which is how John presents that. Side note: if you hear some banging in the background, I don't know if the microphone will pick it up or not. Our church is getting a new roof right now, and the guys have apparently just shown up as I'm recording this and started work. So if you start hearing banging going on, that's what's happening. It's not like there's an earthquake going on or anything. Okay, back at it. So this is the last time that Jesus will spend with the disciples before his betrayal and his death. And it's rather lengthy. Here in John's Gospel, the Last Supper, the teaching that Jesus does to it, the farewell address, or the farewell discourse they call it, it's like 3 chapters long. It's pretty lengthy. Before they go out across the Kidron Valley to the garden where Jesus will pray in anguish, "Father, if it's your will, take this away from me. Let this cup pass from my lips, but not my will, but your will." So this is really kicking the whole thing off. And it's important to remember that this is not just teaching. I mean, it is that, but it's more than that. This is a very personal time that Jesus is spending with his disciples, with the ones who have followed him for 3 years, including Judas. And I think that's important to note. On a personal note, sometimes I struggle of what, to make heads or tails of things with Judas, because I think, did Judas get the short end of the stick? It seems that he is predestined to be the one that will betray Jesus. We hear that Satan places it in the heart of Judas to do it. Is Judas acting of his own accord? Is this something that he had to do, similar to when God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that his glory would be shown to the Israelites clear back in Exodus? I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question. But what I do know is this. Judas's feet were washed too. Judas was there in the other Gospels when Jesus institutes Holy Communion. Judas was there too. So is the grace of God made real in Jesus Christ big enough to overcome all sin? Well, we hear in the book of Romans. One of my colleagues threw this in my face yesterday. This is kind of my go-to verse for a lot of things. Romans 8:38 and 39. Neither height nor depth, nor angels, nor demons, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height nor depth, nor anything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing in all creation can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. So what happens to Judas? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. Another point that came up about Judas was he kills himself before Easter Sunday. What would have happened had he witnessed the resurrection? We don't know. That's not for us to know, not for us to decide on. But that's a tangent, and I'm going to come back to it now. So again, Jesus is having this very personal, very intimate, one could call it very pastoral. I don't necessarily know if that's the right way to look at it, but he's having this final time with his parents, this final time of uninterrupted time with them before everything kicks off. Because Maundy Thursday is when everything kicks off. We have the Last Supper, then they go out to the Kidron, or across the Kidron Valley to the garden where he prays, and then he's betrayed and arrested, and that leads to the trial, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on Good Friday, he's killed, of course. So it's all kicking off. This is the start of it. And how does he start it all? By serving them. That's the thing about the foot washing. And I've talked about this in past videos before, so you can go back and kind of check those out if you want a little bit more information about it. But the foot washing is something that was very common when you came into someone's home. They would provide water. Typically, the person actually washed their own feet, or a very, very, very lowly, like lowest of the low household slave would wash the feet of the individuals as they reclined at the table. And I was reading something about that yesterday, that even a fellow Hebrew who was enslaved in a household, which yes, that happened, even they would not be expected to do this lowly work. That it would be a foreign person. It would be a Gentile slave that would do this. Now, I talk about slaves, and yeah, that makes me tingle uncomfortably because to us now that just seems so barbaric, but that was the reality at the time. So that's where this comes from. But the master, the leader, would never, ever, 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 ever do this. They would not humble themselves to that point. That's just not the way it worked in society at the time. And it's similar to now. Look out for number one. That's the way we do it. Don't humble yourself to anyone. But Jesus came to bring about something new, something different. And what's the basis of it? We hear that in the new commandment. And this is the direction that I think I'm going to go with the sermon. That Jesus tells us to love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And this is in the Greek, it's agape love. Perhaps you've heard me talk before that Greek has like 6 or 7 different words that mean love, and or that we translate as love, and they have different meanings, different. They describe different relationships. Agape is the perfect, sacrificial, perfect. I'm going to use perfect twice. Love, and we're really not capable of it. Only God is, and only Jesus is, because of the perfection that is God. But Jesus gives us this new commandment. A new commandment I give to you: love one another. And it sounds to me surprisingly a lot, or maybe not surprisingly, like when Jesus is challenged by a lawyer or a scribe or different people. What is the most important commandment? Love God and love your neighbor. The entire law and the prophets can be placed upon this. Love God and love your neighbor. Love. The basis of this is love. And I think that comes about from the idea. So John's gospel starts in the beginning. If you go all the way back to John chapter 1, verse 1, we hear in the beginning was the Word. And creation comes about along with the Word which becomes flesh, which is Jesus. And so we think about creation, the beginning of things. And the beginning, God created, we have this back in Genesis 1, out of a place of delight and a place of love. God made things. He's like, that's awesome. And then God makes something else, and God's like, that's awesome too. I love this. This is great. And then God makes humanity. He's like, this is really great. I really love this. And so that's where we start from. And it's important to think about. This is kind of a tangent. I don't know if I'll go here or not, but it's in my head now that our existence, broken though it is, starts from a place of being good. Starts from a place of the one who made us calling us good. That's chapter 1. It's chapter 3 of Genesis before we get to brokenness and the fall and the brokenness, which is present. I'm not saying it's not, but our existence begins from a place that is good. And we have a God who sees that and desires that we look to the good, that we love one another, what does that love look like? Well, it looks sacrificial. It puts another person before us. It puts, you can take whatever you want from that. And it's important that we don't just say, oh, well, the foot washing is this moral thing that we have to that we have to attain. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying here. Especially as we consider that he announces them clean. It's perhaps baptismal in nature. I talked about that a little bit at the beginning, that the foot washing seems very baptismal, but we remember the promise that's spoken to us, that we are through the waters of baptism, we are claimed by God as God's children. That the action that's happening here is on the part of God. It's passive to us. And likewise, Jesus announces to them, if I say you're clean, you're clean. And I say you're clean, except for you, Judas. Which again, I am Judas, but that's tangent. And so what does it mean then to be claimed by God, to be announced as clean, whatever that means? Well, it means love one another. And be the body of Christ, not only for the world, but for the fellow members of the body of Christ. Think about siblings. Sometimes siblings fight like crazy, especially when they're young. You always hope that they grow out of that. I know that's the case with my kids, that most of the time they get along, but sometimes they butt heads. And I think to myself, one day, or a day is going to come when you two are going to be the only ones, the only family that you have left. And I hope that you will care for one another. And I think that's the case here, though, kind of what Jesus is saying. Love one another. Let it be known that you are my disciples because of the way that you love one another, and that you love. Let your love shine. I'm kind of trailing off because I think I'm running out of things to say, but that's the direction that I'm going with the sermon. As we are entering into this dark couple of days, as we remember the death that's coming, or that will walk with Jesus on Good Friday, as we remember that, we remember that the basis for all of this is love, the love that God has for us, the love that God has for all of humanity, the love that God has for all of creation, and that through Christ all things are being made new. So we keep that in the back of our minds as we go through the darkness, and remember that the light still shines. If you have thoughts, questions, comments, throw them down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, have a blessed couple of days of Holy Week, and we'll catch you again in a couple more days as we prepare for Easter.